That's why that's why when you get to these statements, like it's designed to brainwash you, like there's the only reason you can take that seriously is by looking at this long history of the applied sciences to manipulative large-scale communication. And then the paper trails. So there's a book called The Gray Lady, which is about the New York Times. All right, so the New York Times. What is the New York Times? Interesting question. I'm not going to speak in too strong terms about the New York Times, but it has been a propaganda outlet since its inception. So I think the getting very realistic about how deep we are in a simulation of reality that is politically useful, rather than how much great information we have about the state of the world as a result of our contemporary media. Right. So now both of those are kind of true, but you have to be a very discerning consumer of information to get out of this politically useful simulation that has been very, very, very carefully wrapped around us for decades by Academy, New York Times, Fox News, conservative think tanks, liberal think tanks, presidential campaign propaganda to the tune of billions and billions of dollars of internally applied population-centric information war in your own country, which distorts all sense of how the country actually is in terms of what is really going on, to the point where no one really cares. And so that's another lesson. This is another lesson, is like, don't think that you have access to these things that aren't propaganda and those other people you don't like are being propagandized. No, if you're one of those people, you're probably the most propagandized because you're reading the New York Times thinking that somehow it's not propaganda, right? Fox News is propaganda, but the New York Times, you're like, no, dude, no error. Like, oh, but the peer-reviewed publications, those, nope, error, right? Peer-reviewed publications are paid for by who? Interesting, right? So all of that becomes quite a mess. And a lot of that is laid out in the Consilience papers, which try to demonstrate just how deep and long-standing the issue. I mean, it goes back to Ramses, like the pharaoh of Egypt. That's like propaganda goes back to obelisks. Like literally, he just put obelisks in places that in universally recognized graphs, like, hieroglyphics, showed the brutality of what he was able to do to the people who stood against him, right? And he would just have those commissioned and just put out randomly just to prepare people, just in case, I'm coming, Ramses is coming. And then, of course, the grandeur of the monumental architecture also built in part to reconfirm the sense that he is a god. So the history of propaganda is super old. And then you're a communications guy, so then it goes through, print, electricity, television, into digital, and then digital just goes exponential to the extent that it's becoming like a mental health problem. If you include advertising, which I do, as propaganda, which just means communication intended to manipulate you rather than communication intended to inform/coordinate with you around reality. So if you include all of the manipulative communication that's directed at you, it's like most of your communication if you're online. And so, that's a mental health problem because there's nowhere to look. There's no one to trust.